A hymn we've sung many times here at All Souls in a revised version for today's times by Jim Scott. Jim is a well-known UU musician, having performed with the likes of Pete Seeger, Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul and Mary, and the Paul Winter Consort. Jim not only wrote the original version of hymn number 347 in our gray hymnal, but he also co-chaired the 7th Principle Project, the one about honoring the web of existence in which we all live. He was also one of the creators of the Green Sanctuary program. I'd like to offer special thanks at this time to Indra Frank and the committee who assisted her in achieving Green Sanctuary status for All Souls Indy. Another round of applause, please. The version that we're going to hear is performed by Pat Lamanna. Pat is an award-winning folk singer-songwriter living in New York's Hudson Valley and a member of the UU Fellowship of Poughkeepsie, New York. We ask that you not sing because of the resurging. We ask that you not sing because of the resurging COVID Delta variant. We ask that. Thank you for cooperating.
Unfortunately, you just have to listen to me do it. But I'll do it with the gusto of everybody collectively, hopefully. And we'll all feel it. Gather in spirit, shelter in place. Let's do what we can to flatten the curve. Now wash your hands often. Don't touch your face. This virus is something that no one deserves. Gather on Skype, gather on Zoom, gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave your room. Let's all stay safe till this crisis ends. Gather on Facebook, but not for too long. There's so many ways of passing the time. Take a crochet or write a new song. Read a good book. Big brownie sublime. Gather on Skype or gather on Zoom. Gather by phone with family and friends. Gather online, but don't leave your room. And let's all stay safe till this crisis ends. Gather in spirit and pray for the sacred, the sick and the poor, the lonely at home. And count all your blessings, reach out and share. Let everyone see that they're not alone. Gather on Skype or gather on Zoom, and gather by phone with family and friends, and gather online, but don't leave your room, and let's all stay safe till this crisis ends.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I don't think we would have known those words. They're not in the hymnal. Growing up here, UU at All Souls Indy, 7 decades ago now, congregants giving sermons was not a part of our church culture. Many other things have changed since those days. We didn't have 7, let alone 8 principles guiding us. And we didn't hear words like multicultural, pluralism. And certainly we didn't hear about gender fluidity or a variety of identities like bisexual and transgender. But something that hasn't changed is our covenant. Will you please join me now, and you may repeat this if you have been vaccinated, in repeating our covenant as Elena Rose Leal and her sister Lydia come to light our chalice in celebration of Elena's 5th birthday yesterday and Lydia's birthday coming up on Wednesday. And she is with su mamá ahora, right now. Good job. Thank you, Elena. Please join me in speaking the covenant, which the words are in your order of service, or you may have them memorized like me. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. Now we have our time for all ages with Miss Sarah Cannon, followed by Joyce and Sorrows with Nesrin.
Good morning. I know we have some new visitors today, so for those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Cannon, and I'm our Director of Children's and Community Programming here at All Souls. And I was so excited today when I saw John's sermon and he told me what he was going to talk about. I thought this is going to be great because I really appreciate it when grown-up UUs are honest about the stuff that's tough about being UU, especially in front of kids, because sometimes we don't talk about that. And so let me tell you a little story about that topic. Once upon a time, when Graham was still one of the little babies that would come up front during the time for all ages and try to touch the pages of the book, and all the grown-ups would go, "Aw," I volunteered with the middle schoolers. I didn't actually have a kid who was a middle schooler. My oldest, Will, was still a little too young. So I didn't know any of these kids. They were not the kids that ran around with my kids during coffee hour. And that made me feel a little bit awkward, a little bit out of place. Because for one thing, I wasn't even sure I knew enough about being UU to be in there. And for another thing, I wasn't even sure what kind of questions middle school kids had about being UU. And it was a group of very different kids with very different interests. There was a kid who liked to dress up in historical costumes and volunteer at a museum, like that kind of situation where you have to pretend to be someone from a different time. There were other kids who loved sports or played musical instruments or were really interested in fashion. There was a kid who was kind of gadgety and he was always building or making something. In fact, the only thing they all agreed on was that they loved the TV show Mythbusters. So if you've never checked that out, go look, because there appears to be broad consensus about this. But as we started talking more about being UU, the kids discovered that they all had the same shared experience. At some point on the bus or at camp or during school lunch, someone would say to them, "What church do you go to?" And sometimes they had to kind of explain what the UU church was for people who hadn't heard of it. And then the kids would say, "Oh, that's not really a church. You can just believe whatever you want. Well, those of you who've been here for a while know that I've done a time for all ages about that before, and that's not really true. You can't really believe whatever you want in BUU because we all follow the principles, and there are people who aren't interested in doing that. So it's not quite true. But here's another thing I always think about when I think about those stories that all of those kids in the middle school class told me. Everybody believes whatever they want. Now, I want to be fair. If you're a kid, you basically go to church where your parents go to church. Am I right? Yeah, pretty much. And there are even some grown-ups that go to the same church that their family goes to because they feel like they have to. Like maybe they would go somewhere different if their family didn't go there, but they do. And maybe their family has even said to them, hey, it's really important to us that you go here. And I think it would be very bad if you didn't. But for the most part, we pick where we go to church. And if we were going somewhere it wasn't working for us, we would go someplace else. So we do have a choice about what we believe. And here's the other thing. If you line up a group of people from the same church or synagogue or mosque or neighborhood, and you ask them a bunch of questions about what they believe, they're not going to give you identical answers. They're just not. Faith is complicated. So even if they have a creed, a set of beliefs that they all agree to, when you get into the details, you're going to start to see some differences. Especially if you give a person a story with a problem that needs to be solved, two people who go to the same faith community could argue about that for a long time. And in fact, it's one of the really cool things about theology. People like to work their theology muscles by having those conversations. What's right? What's wrong? What would you do if this happened to you? In fact, there are whole podcasts where that's just all that people do the whole time. They're really interesting to listen to. So here's what I think people are saying when they wave their hands at you and they say, you people just believe whatever you want. I think what they mean is that having a creed makes them feel like they have rules and answers, and that makes them feel safe. I get that. We all like to feel safe. But whether you have a, here's what faith actually means. It means belief in something for which you have no proof. In fact, in the Christian Bible, in the letter to the Hebrews, and we don't actually know who wrote this part, but it is in there. They say something really beautiful about faith. They say, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. What makes faith beautiful is that we're hoping, but we don't know. And that's true whether you're a humanist who puts their faith in the good of other people or a theist who believes in a higher power. We hope, but we don't know. So whether you're a kid or an adult, don't let it shake you up when folks say, oh, you just believe whatever you want. You have faith in a lot of different things, but we all share faith in the idea that we can have different beliefs and still be together as one community. What that kid on the bus or neighbor or person you play tennis with is really saying is that they don't get that. And that's okay. They're just going to have a little faith in you. Thank you.
So there are a few errors, not in the order of service, in the worship associate this morning. I forgot to do my own member reflection, so we're going to do that now. Then the joys and sorrows. Something else that has not changed since I was a child here at All Souls is our dedication to taking care of the environment. The windows in our sanctuary, if we were able to be in there, you would notice were designed in such a way that when we look out the window, we see nature in wide expanse, blue sky and clouds, trees with leaves changing color every season, and sunshine or raindrops. One of the biggest arguments we had once was whether to put a stained glass window over that natural view. The natural view won. We're now faced with severe consequences in many communities around the world due to human use of fossil fuels, causing climate change from the temperature of our Earth being elevated. I think we all believe that now, don't we? We're hearing in the news about more and more of the disasters scientists predicted would happen as a result of climate change. It's not easy being green, but we must try our best to be. When the change needed to avoid, let alone prepare for these disasters we're now experiencing takes so long to be realized, it can be daunting to hold on to a faith such as ours that Sarah just described for you, one that is flexible and not dogmatic, that allows us to make choices and choose how we behave, not just follow a list of commandments or be good just to achieve a pleasant afterlife. Have you ever searched online jokes about Unitarian Universalists? There are pages of them. Here are a couple. Why did the UU cross the road? To help the chicken in its search for truth and its own path. What do UUs have instead of the 10 commandments? The 10 suggestions. What do you call a Unitarian Universalist who died? All dressed up with no place to go. When I was growing up and asked about my religion and I replied Unitarian, I was always then asked, what's that? As Sarah mentioned, our middle school youth shared that same reaction that occurs to them this year when I spoke with that class. That's something that hasn't changed. But despite these challenges for our faith, it has had a positive influence on the world since its beginning. UUs such as Francis David were martyred during the Reformation. And UUs such as the originator of the flower communion that we celebrated last week were killed during the Holocaust. UU James Reeb died for the rights of formerly enslaved people here in America. But we don't have to be martyrs to make a difference. As John Murphy is going to share with you this morning, we choose being UU even though it's hard. I choose taking care of each other, taking care of the earth, and trying to live the covenant I've repeated for 70 plus years. Nasreen will share with us our joys and sorrows.
Yep. Good morning. Thank you so much for attending our service this morning. A few notes this morning of ways that we can care for each other as we are in community together. Sherilyn Bainey just texted me this morning that Livy was admitted to Community North last night for an infection in her bloodstream. And so she would appreciate good vibes and prayers sent her way. And I'll be publishing the address where you can send cards and notes of encouragement. Also, a member, Michael Rourke, just underwent surgery on his knee last week. And his information is in the order of service and would also appreciate notes and cards of encouragement. One thing someone said to me is that this normal isn't that far off from our normal a year ago. And it hasn't set too well with me, but I think one thing that should sit well with us is that if our norm is to be caring, if our norm is to care for one another, then we aren't that far off than we were a year ago. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
One more revision, Greg, don't cut this one off. Right now, we're going to do kind of an unusual type of prayer. It's called an embodied prayer. And as you noticed earlier, I'm a dancer. So we're going to dance a prayer, and I'm going to teach you the movements, and they're pretty simple, and they just repeat. So don't worry. This is an easy dance, and it's just your hands, okay? So I need to do it now. Okay. Pay no attention to the order of service this morning. Let's just say that. Okay. So the hymn is number 318, We Would Be One. And an embodied prayer is a dance which asks whatever we consider to be our higher power, in my case, the universe, for realization of a hope. And my hope today is that in the midst of disasters caused by climate change, in the midst of ongoing pandemic taking lives and deeply stressing our medical professionals, and in the face of continued injustice experienced by people of color, we will offer a gesture of hope and comfort to ourselves. So the first movement you need to learn is to hug yourself. Easy one, right? The second one is asking the universe. And the next one is kind of including everyone in our prayer. You guys are good. You're good dancers. Okay. So now, Greg, if you'll give us the music.
Now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. To show to all a new
Please join me in a moment of silence.
Thank you for that, Sandy. I offer you these words by Scott W. Alexander. In a world with so much hatred and violence, we need a religion that proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of every person. In a world with so much brutality and fear, we need a religion that seeks justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Sound familiar? Yes. In a world with so many persons abused and neglected, we need a religion that calls us to accept one another and encourage one another to spiritual growth. In a world with so much dogma and falsehood, we need a religion that challenges us to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. In a world with so much tyranny and oppression, we need a religion that affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. In a world with so much inequality and strife, we need a religion that strives toward the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And finally, number 7, in a world with so much environmental degradation, we need a religion that advocates respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. In a world with so much uncertainty and despair, we need a religion that teaches our hearts to hope and our hands to serve. Now, I believe with all the adjusting of the order of service, it's time for me to give you my sermon. So here we go. Several years ago, when my wife Jane and I were exploring whether membership at All Souls was a good fit for us, we attended a session for prospective members led by the minister at the time, Reverend Dr. Bruce Clear. As a part of the orientation, he offered to address questions we might have about the church and Unitarian Universalism in general. My question was more like an observation, and I still consider it an open question to this day. I asked Bruce to give his take on the notion that our lack of a definite doctrine puts Unitarian Universalism at a disadvantage relative to that of the other religions. I noted, for example, that the idea of torture to death by crucifixion of the Son of God in atonement for our sins that saved us from eternal damnation was a powerful and compelling narrative. Or the satisfaction that believing that my tribe, the saved, would live forever in the hereafter in a place of comfort and bliss, while the other tribe, the unsaved evildoers, would suffer eternal punishment for their misdeeds, offered strong motivation. Now, I don't recall exactly how Bruce answered my query, but I do remember that his answer left me a little unsatisfied. And my own answer to this leaves me with the nagging feeling that while our chosen faith of Unitarian Universalism is intellectually appealing, we may also be in some ways handcuffed by our lack of a uniform doctrine. For example, we're often restrained by our deeply held conviction that everyone's belief are their own business, as Sarah said earlier. That we should no way intrude or try to convince anyone that our approach in seeking truth and meaning is best. In fact, for me, saying that I'm seeking means that I must convince myself that lack of definitive answers to life's deepest questions is all just fine. I suspect that for many, like me, being satisfied with living with such ambiguity is sometimes unsettling. Most of us use, when pressed, will identify ourselves with a religious tendency, sometimes with a specific name, such as atheist, theist, Buddhist, pagan, agnostic, Christian, Jewish, or sometimes just spiritual. Reverend Joel likes to challenge our thinking by saying he is both an atheist and a theist. And then he playfully declines to answer or explain, saying that he can't do so. Well, I think he may be onto something that I had not given much thought until now. I'm beginning to see that some degree of hybrid religious thinking is possibly required of all of us. Let me explain. Our covenant says in the fourth line, to seek the truth in love. For me, that means primarily as an agnostic, I must take in some of all the other religious persuasions. Because being merely tolerant of the other ideas is not sufficient. For example, when one of my fellow UUs brings God into the conversation, I'm obliged to dispense with all of the arguments against God that my atheist part loves to bring to bear on him. Instead, I might need to see if they might be talking about some benevolent entity that I admit could be present everywhere in the universe. It's even possible that they may be talking about someone or something that takes a personal interest in the affairs of humans. If so, I need to be prepared to acknowledge that such a God could have a plan for each creature, including humans, I would need to understand that the thought of a benevolent parent looking out for me might provide some comfort and reassurance. Now, I'm not advocating taking on or incorporating others' beliefs. Yet, the expectation to be sympathetic towards all the diverse theological beliefs sometimes feels to me a bit burdensome. As a true Unitarian Universalist, am I expected to be conversant about all the various religious traditions? If so, then I confess that I failed so miserably that the church should probably annul my membership and confiscate my name badge. And what about the 7 principles? To some, the 7 principles and 6 sources may seem so generic and devoid of holy language that they seem like guidelines for an ethical society of some sort. Meg Barnhouse, in an article published in November 2009 issue of UU World magazine, notes, I listen to people talk sometimes about liberal religion as if it's a thin gruel, watered down to please everyone. Our 7 principles, they complain, are either too much like a creed or so general as to be meaningless. Actually, the title of her essay is, Who Says Unitarian Universalist Principles Are Easy? And the thrust of her argument is that the 7 principles are actually very demanding. Many years back, when I was searching for a church home, I found All Souls through a small ad in the Sunday Star that had the byline, Where Reason and Religion Meet. I think some of you remember us having that byline. I finally attended church one Sunday out of curiosity, and I was more than intrigued by the words of the covenant displayed on the wall and recited by the congregation, and by the 7 principles that were printed in the order of service. The sermon topic, I can't recall exactly. It was a thoughtful essay on some aspect of spirituality, devoid of guilt and condemnation. I remember thinking to myself, what a good fit this was for me, and how easy it would be to espouse these ideas that were so congruent with my own thinking. Over the years, I have come to realize that while the 7 principles do let me off the hook about God, heaven, hell, and other weighty theological matters, they nonetheless demand much of me. Like Reverend Barnhouse says in her essay, she writes, the first one asked me to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, which means, as she continues, I can no longer subscribe to the cheerful Calvinist doctrine of the total depravity of human nature. She continues, now I have to struggle with worth and dignity of people who do unspeakably awful things, whereas the doctrine of total depravity makes that one a no-brainer. I think we all struggle with having any respect for the worth and dignity of seemingly evil human beings whose actions don't even come close to being worthy of respect. In wrestling with this thorny question, some thoughts come to mind. First, respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person is a statement about me. It says that I will not sacrifice my humanity in dealing with anyone. It means, for example, I will not even think of condoning torture, regardless of how despicable a person may be. It means that I do not get to judge who deserves what, regardless of how righteous my indignation may seem to be. On the other hand, it also means that I do not have to have respect for the person or their actions. I can have utter contempt for those. But I must have the humility to recognize that as a member of the human race, like them, I'm capable of both good and bad. I'm convinced that people who are able to do unspeakable things to others do so by dehumanizing them. If the subject being brutalized is not even human, then it's fine to do whatever to it. The first principle brings us back from sinking to the same level as those who are able to regard their victims only as objects, which can be abused without mercy. Said in another way for me, the first principle demands respect for the humanness of every person. Still, how could we have respected the inherent worth and dignity of a fiend like Adolf Hitler? Oh well, maybe there are exceptions to every rule. I can't actually leave the topic of the difficulty of living the first principle without pointing out the courage of some in our faith, like that of Dr. Norbert Chapek, a Unitarian minister in Prague, Czechoslovakia, who created the first flower communion, a ritual we observed here last Sunday. As we noted, as the result of his gospel of the inherent worth and beauty of every human person, when the Nazis took control of Prague in 1940, they found Dr. Chapek, and I quote, too dangerous to the Reich to be allowed to live. As a consequence, he was sent to Dachau, where he was killed the next year during a Nazi medical experiment. So Dr. Chapek's story and other similar ones lend a whole lot of perspective about what it can take to adhere to the principle of respect for the inherent worth and dignity of every person. I seriously doubt whether any of us would ever be called upon to die for doing so. Okay, let's talk about another one of the principles, the fifth, which actually embodies two sometimes problematic notions: right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. So what does this right of conscience entail? Well, on the surface, those high-sounding words say that when the church or our association takes a position on any matter, individuals or groups are free to disagree and say so in no uncertain terms. In practice, however, the right of conscience is sometimes suppressed in favor of expectations to conform to an accepted norm. For example, our fealty to a liberal religion can sometimes get extrapolated to political or social liberalism, so much so that someone who may believe in conservative government policy cannot say so without fear of shaming or censure. Another aspect of freedom of conscience is the fact that there are so many worthy causes, some more compelling than others. And in almost every case, there are two sides to the question. And strong proponents can often fail to see that there may be legitimate arguments against even the most obvious assertions. Paul Beatty, who served his congregation as a minister from 1969 to 1982, was a strong proponent of intellectual freedom or freedom of conscience. And many of you older members can remember that he preached that at almost every opportunity. He maintained that no person should be compelled or coerced to promote causes that contradict their conscience. Seems to me that the freedom of conscience can be a bit of a sticky wicket, depending on the particular cause being championed. The other part of the fifth principle talks about the use of the democratic process. And we hold a reverential respect for this bedrock of our democratic republic, and rightly so. Of all the ways of settling questions that affect our lives, this process seems to work best. Nevertheless, it doesn't always work out as smoothly as it would appear. When the issues to be decided is non-controversial, no problem. We could just ask for unanimous consent and get on with it. It'd be quite a different story when the issue is highly contentious and the two sides start to dig in. Folks on each side become enemies who demonize and dehumanize others on the other side. First principle goes out the window. Church splits into warring camps with little hope of reconciliation. We're actually witnessing this in our country today. So what I'm describing is a real phenomenon, and it happens over and over in many organizations. It has, in fact, happened in this very church in the near past. And we are still dealing with the fallout. Bottom line is that the use of the democratic process doesn't guarantee that the losing side feels that they have been heard. It's only human nature to believe that since your arguments are so compelling, that if someone disagrees with you, it's because they haven't heard or understood your position. I think we all fall into that thinking at one time or another. And to be totally fair, the majority isn't always right. I'll close my critique by mentioning one more tenet of Unitarian Universalism that can sometimes elicit dissension and strife. We at All Souls have traditionally embraced freedom of the pulpit. The Unitarian Universalist Association suggests that the congregations adopt some version of a policy that states the ministers shall have freedom of the pulpit as well as freedom to express his or her opinion outside the pulpit. The UUA guidance advocates that our principles call upon us to respect a diversity of opinion, and the freedom of the pulpit should be a part of our cherished tradition. So, bottom line, this means that our minister or any other invited speaker should be free to express their own opinion. The problem is that many of us are conditioned to lend some authority and credence to what is said from the pulpit. For many of us, this tendency may have been rooted in our past experience in churches where the preacher is authorized to interpret the Holy Scriptures, and it's frowned upon to question what is said from that exalted position. Now, we Unitarian Universalists do give our ministers the respect they have earned, but we do not necessarily just go along with whatever is said. Our stance is that we are empowered to think for ourselves, and we should feel free to disagree with what's said from the pulpit. And I can tell you More than once, I've been in sharp disagreement, to put it mildly, with something a minister or speaker has said from our pulpit. Even more bothersome, I have personally witnessed several incidents where members have left the church in anger because they disagreed with something the minister said or espoused. In one instance, I patiently tried to explain the idea of freedom of the pulpit to them, but they had it ingrained that the minister's word was the last on any subject. They just couldn't abide a situation where they and the minister were at odds on the subject. I'll confess that I share some of the same discomfort about this matter, but I accept freedom of the pulpit as the better way. Okay, well, if being UU is such a bother, why do we do it? To get at this question, if you would, go with me to revisit some of the so-called difficulties that I've talked about. First, why put up with not having definitive answers to some of the most important questions of life? Well, for me, religious tenets that do attempt to provide definitive answers ultimately provide inconsistencies, contradictions, and illogical assertions. So I am effectively left with no good answers in any case. Why go to the trouble of coexistence with diverse and very religious ideas? Although, as I confessed earlier, that while I am by no means a scholar on the world religions, I've seen enough to understand that our reliance on teachings from other faith traditions feels right for me personally. Why tamp down our righteous hatred of evildoers? I think this one may be the toughest one for me to truly incorporate into my worldview. But I do totally understand that enmity begets enmity, and that my failure to recognize my adversary as a human being means that I am sacrificing my own humanity. Is that who or what I truly want to be? Why go along with the edict of the majority when it's clearly the wrong thing to do? Unfortunately, I cannot think of any better way for a group of fallible humans to decide a difficult question. Can you? Finally, why allow a speaker to voice heretical ideas from our pulpit? It seems to me that worship often entails an expectation that we listen with reverence to ideas and thinking that we can all agree on. Yet, we also hold the belief that rational thought and reasoning is to be valued. And although it can be annoying at times to have my notions questioned, it is always instructive for me to examine why I think such and such is true. If my convictions can't hold up to scrutiny, then are they truly based on sound reasoning, or are they just emotionally driven assumptions? In summary, I can't speak for you, but I hope you can see from me there is simply no other religious path I could take. I couldn't be anything but a Unitarian Universalist. Granted, my chosen faith has its issues, but our way of dealing with them stands out. We absolutely understand that our covenant and the principles we covenant to aspire to don't always keep us from falling short, but they provide guideposts and standards we can use to hold ourselves accountable and each other. So is it easy being you? Well, maybe not. But for me, It's easier being you than anything else. I want to thank you and the worship team for allowing me the freedom of the pulpit to speak to my truth today.
Once again, the order of service is going to be modified. And Greg, if after the offertory, we could repeat the embodied prayer, and it would be great. So at this time, it's time for the offertory. Each week, we share our offering plate with an organization that shares and advances our values. And this week, we will divide the offering 3 ways, sharing with 2 funds of the Unitarian Universalist Association that provide relief to those experiencing disasters. The Unitarian Universalist Service Committee's Emergency Response Fund is in contact with our long-term grassroots partners in the country of Haiti to assess and respond to the pressing needs of that nation following a 7.2 magnitude earthquake on August 14th of this year, followed immediately by Tropical Storm Grace. This past week, Hurricane Ida wreaked devastation to communities in Louisiana, including Baton Rouge, where Reverend Miller recently served a UU congregation. Our contribution to the Disaster Relief Fund of the UUA will help cover the cost of food, water, shelter, and sanitation in Louisiana, basics that are especially hard to find given the risks of the COVID-19 infection. Please give as generously as you can. You can place checks made out to ASUC or cash in these baskets that I will place conveniently where you can stay 6 feet apart and masked if you need to be. And if you are participating virtually, a link for contributing or providing will be provided in the chat on your screen. May we now accept our morning offering as Alex sings for us.
It's not easy being having to spend each day the color of the leaves. When I think it could be nicer in red or yellow or gold or something much more colorful like that. It's not easy being green. Seems you blend in with so many other things. People tend to pass you over because you're not standing out like a flashy sparkle in the water or stars in the sky. The green's the color of spring, and green can be cool and friendly light. And green can be big like a mountain, or important like a river, or tall like a tree. And green is all there is to do. It'll make you wonder why, but why, wonder why I'm green. Fine. It's beautiful, and I think it's what I want to be.
And now we'll repeat our embodied prayer. And this time I'll stand where everyone can see me.
As now we join and sing, I am not love to pledge ourselves and you to the high cause of fragrance and you.
From Theodore Parker, Unitarian minister, reformer, and abolitionist. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love, its profession of faith, divine living. Go in peace with a good heart and live divinely. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Just a few brief announcements today. The first and most important is that even if you don't normally fill out our online connection card, please go do so today, because the very first item under ways that you would like to connect is kind of a straw poll of how many people think that they would like to attend the church retreat this year. We realize that COVID numbers are changing and that Delta has changed the landscape. And so we just need a better sense of whether that's something that people feel comfortable doing or not before we go forward. In addition, if you're new to our congregation, make sure that you check in with one of us before you leave, because you may not yet have the link to our online connection card, which most people receive in their order of service. That way we can connect you as families with our faith formation programs. Everyone else should have that in your email. And if you're a youth, please remember that our hike today is from 12 to 2. Thank you.
And once again, go in peace with a good heart and live divinely and cheerfully. And I want to say happy anniversary to my husband. No cards necessary, just Facebook. Happy anniversary, honey.
"25 years and my life is still trying to get up that great big hill of hope for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should that the world was made up of this brotherhood of man, or whatever that means. And so I cry sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out. It's in my head and I'm feeling a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath, get real high, and I scream from the top of my lungs, "What's going on?" And I said, "Hey, yeah, 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 hey, yeah, yeah." I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I pray, oh my God, do I pray? I pray every day in this institution, and I try. Oh my God, do I try? I try all the time. Oh, revolution. And so I cry sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out. It's in my head and I am feeling a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath, get real high, and I scream from the top of my lungs, "What's going on?" And I said, "Hey, yeah, 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 hey, yeah." I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I said, "Hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah." I said, "Hey, what's going on?" Thank you.